Hey guys, so thank you so much for joining me on this trauma discussion video. If you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, then you know that I thought it was a very important time to really talk about unresolved issues and unresolved trauma, simply because January tends to be the month where everybody likes to start over, or proclaim new beginnings, and proclaim this new year, new me, set new goals, and all of that is good. But I have to and I don't mean to put a damper on your guys' parade, but I have to remind you guys that no matter how many times you try to reinvent yourself, how many times you try to start over, some things will just always follow you. If you refuse to acknowledge and face your past hurts, your past traumas, your past disappointments, then I guarantee you that in some area of your life it will show up again, and it will continuously show up until you face it and address it and heal from it. I want to set you up to where you can have the best year possible, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I wasn't willing to just talk to you about trauma and unresolved trauma, because there's so much information to be known, and a lot of people just don't know, and they're just not aware of how they are moving through the world with unresolved issues. So this video is going to talk about this past episode, or the most recent episode of This Is Us. So if you have not seen that episode, then I would suggest you pause this video, go watch it, and come back so you can understand what I'm talking about. And I really don't want to spoil it for you, but there's going to be a lot of spoilers if you don't watch it. For educational purposes, I guess, or just so I know that you're aware, I want to start with a little bit of just simple information before we get into like the heavy stuff and how Randall shows us what it looked like to cope with unresolved issues and where it comes from. So trauma is an emotional response to a disturbing or distressful event or series of events. So how do we respond to fear or stress? And so in this video, fear and stress, they're not the same, but we do respond to them in very similar ways. So how do we respond to fear or stress? That's called the acute stress response, aka fight, flight, or freeze. I'm sure you've heard of it. And so what fight, flight, or freeze, or the acute stress response, is a physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival. So each of these, fight, flight, or freeze, is a self-protective mechanism. So your brain will trigger or initiate this response, and your body will respond in one of these three ways. So to paint a little picture, imagine you walking down a road. I don't know where you are, where this will happen, but just imagine you're walking down the road and minding your own business, and a bear just comes out of nowhere. Your brain will go through this acute stress response process. It will trigger you to respond in one of three ways. You can, one, fight. Fight means to engage the threat, to protect yourself. So you could fight this bear off. And that can show up in different ways, whether you are actually fighting against the bear, or you can start crying, you can start yelling, you can start throwing things. And this is not just the bear, but in other stressful situations, you literally engage whatever the threat is. In other instances, your body will respond in a flight reaction, and that basically means disengaging from the threat, and you pretty much just run away from the threat. You literally just flee the threat, right? And the last one is freeze. So basically what that means is that your body will respond in reaction where you cannot move. You feel frozen. There are a lot of biological things going on in your body when you are in that freeze response. It's almost like you're in shock. You can't move. Your brain is trying to tell you something, but your body cannot process what's going on. And so that is also a way to almost disengage the threat, because it's almost as though you feel like the threat will pass you by, right? So fight, flight, or freeze. So let's talk about Randall. So Randall, like most of us, responded to a lot of perceived threats in this episode in all three of these ways. Like in various scenes, he responded in each one of these ways. The first threat was obviously the home intruder, and his initial response was to freeze. And you can actually see his body almost shut down when he first engaged with the intruder, right? His next run-in with a perceived threat was the purse snatcher, and he responded in the fight response, right? This purse snatcher scene happens after the home intrusion, so it's almost as though his first response was to freeze. His second response was, now he's on high alert. He's hyper vigilant in an environment that wasn't a perceived threat to him before. It has now become a threat. So now he's looking out for threats in an environment that he once thought was safe, right? So now his response changes. So he sees another threat, and now he actually engages this threat and he beats this man up, right? I didn't even know Randall had that in him, but go ahead, Randall. The last response was his flight response. After the purse snatcher event, he goes back to work, and he's not prepared to go back to work because he hasn't coped well. But when everybody is applauding him, calling him a hero, that was another instance of a stress-inducing moment. So what does he do? He flees. He literally walks out of the office, or runs out of the office, or, shuffles out of the office. When there's a flight response, there's a disengagement from the threat because you want to protect yourself. So we see Randall battling with unresolved trauma all throughout this episode. And as you can see, the effects of trauma can permeate in all aspects of your life. And this is why it's so important for us to work through our past issues, because it is very likely that things that we leave unresolved will show up in another area of our lives if we refuse to address them. So this new event, the home intruder, was just a new trauma that opened up the floodgates. We see that he didn't make it to the grief support group, and he also turned down or rejected the idea of therapy when he was in college. I can understand how he ended up this way, just like most of us. If you have an immediate response to a traumatic event, such as a panic attack or having nightmares, crying episodes, or just being hypervigilant, etc., it's pretty clear to you what caused those responses. Like, let's just say if I was in an accident yesterday, and today I'm having trouble sleeping, and today I am crying, like, it'll be obvious to myself and to everybody that the accident yesterday was the source of these responses, right? So that's what I mean when we talk about an immediate response to a traumatic event. However, when you do not have an immediate reaction, or when your symptoms seem to resolve relatively quickly after a trauma, it's easy to assume that the trauma didn't impact you, or it no longer impacts you, as though, I'm over it. It's rarely the case where there is an immediate response to an event, or your symptoms resolve in a way that is quick and it's actually resolved. That's rarely the case. And we see this in Randall when he decided to go back to work like 2 days after the home intruder incident. Like the very next day, he was in action. He was trying to do things to prevent it from happening again. But he had already dealt with so much during that week. He dealt with, his mom, then this home intruder. At first he was like, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm good, I can go through it. But we all know that wasn't the case at all. So Randall unresolved trauma is a result of his lack of proper coping skills. Where do we see this stem from? The way that Randall has learned how to cope with stress or fear. Sorry. And I'm sad to say, but it's so common, is his dad. As much as we love Jack as a husband and as a father, we learned that, especially in this episode, that he is not as perfect as we imagine him to be. And we seen that in the last episode when he just left Rebecca at the table during their date because he was afraid to be with her. And we see that again in this episode. He did something that I'm sure most parents can relate to. And this isn't a judgment, it's just an observation. Well, when Randall was a toddler, I believe that's toddler age, we see Jack handle Randall's fear of sleeping alone the best way he know how, honestly. You know, he tries to soothe Randall. He even goes into the bedroom and lays on the floor. He stays with him for as long as he thinks is necessary until Randall gets comfortable. Or maybe he thought Randall had fallen asleep, and so he decides to get up and leave the room. You know, in that moment, Jack is tired. His back is probably hurting from lying on the floor, and all he wants to do is just probably go get comfortable, lay on the couch, watch a little bit of TV, or go to bed, you know. So he gets up, he leaves the room. And when he leaves the room, sure enough, Randall follows right behind him and tries to get him to come back into the room. Everything Randall becomes as an adult, this is what triggers it. He basically tells him that because his siblings are essentially the needy kids, like, you know, your brother and sister, they require a lot of emotional energy from me. And he tells Randall, you know, because your brother and sister need so much from me, I need you to be that kid that don't require so much emotional support. Like, I need you to be the good kid. Like, I for my sanity, I need you to not be afraid and go back to bed. That's pretty much what he tells him. And so that planted the seed in Randall, and that whole sense of perfectionism and the needing to hold it all together. Even though Randall was too young to really comprehend the idea of perfectionism and understanding how to hold it all together, I believe his sense of wanting to please the people that he loved and not wanting to be a burden or inconvenience the people that he loved, he took that and he internalized it. But of course, whether you try to keep everything in, your body will always let you know, hey, I'm stressed, you're doing too much. And for Randall, that showed up in his panic attacks. Like in this episode, you see his need wanting to keep together the first time, when he decided not to talk about his dreams with his mom. This is when he was a teenager, right? You know, it was really bothering him, and he did go to her, but you know, she's busy, she's doing things, she's talking about, you know, what she got going on, and he's like, and then his brother comes with his girlfriend, so now he's like, you know, don't worry about it. But ultimately, the idea of, hey, I don't want to inconvenience anybody, I don't want to be a burden, I'm just gonna keep it to myself. We see it again when Randall tried to return back to work. Like I mentioned, he went back to work 2 days after the home invader incident. And so he's back at work, saying, hey, you know, I'm good. I know most people would, you know, stay out longer, but we got things to do. So I'm here, I'm good. We're going to keep, we're going to keep working. We see it again when he's on the phone with his brother the first time, and his brother consents, you know, something was wrong, and he started to talk a little bit, but then he immediately shut down when his brother started to probe him. And we see it again when he's talking to Deja's boyfriend's dad. I don't remember his name. Malik, ain't that his name? Malik's dad. Malik's dad go to him and he's like, I noticed something was bothering you and I'm here for you. And he was receptive in the beginning, but then he started talking about therapy, and at first you think Randall is going to like approve of this message, and then all of a sudden it's just like, nope, shut that down. He rejects him and he tells him, nope, I run. That's how I cope with things, right? I really wonder what Randall was thinking during each of these moments, what really made him decide to hold back how he really felt. I think there's some shame there, but also it looked more like, you know, he just didn't want to feel like he was being a burden or an inconvenience to others. And where did this show up? You know, again, it goes way back to when he was a child and he wanted Jack to stay in his room while he slept. And in that moment, regardless of how young Randall was, even though he lacked the understanding of what Jack was trying to comprehend or Jack was trying to convey to him, he really took that and he really internalized that moment, and it continued to perpetuate itself throughout his adult years. He just learned how to not be an inconvenience to those that he really loved and cared about. So as I wrap up this discussion, I really want to pose a few things to you as it relates to unresolved trauma and childhood trauma. So the first thing is that, you know, sometimes we don't even know we are suffering from unresolved issues. We've adapted so much to the changes that happen within ourselves as a result of traumas, that we just start to believe it's a part of our personality, it's a part of who we are. So unless you have processed it through therapy, a lot of us truly believe that, you know, the way we are moving through the world is normal, right? We don't know we are suffering from anxiety because we've always had anxiety. We don't know we're depressed because we've always functioned with depression. We've gotten along in this world for so long, despite the trail of casualties that we've left behind. We don't even see a need to look into certain behaviors. People are so loyal to their dysfunction because it's familiar. People will put up a fight to hold on to the system that is not working for them. And what I mean by systems, I mean the way you think, the way you understand things, and the way you speak. We tend to say, you know, this is just who I am. Or they may say, you know, that's just who they are, that's just how they act, you know, that's just them. Or we may say, yeah, maybe I do get emotional when I'm upset or when something don't go my way, but I'm just a sensitive person. You know, have you heard that before? Have you said that before? Or maybe you say things like, yeah, sometimes it takes a lot of effort for people to like calm me down, but people be getting on my nerves. People be working my nerves. People be on my nerves, right? Or, you know, sometimes people may say, yeah, I pop off easy, and, you know, people be making me upset because people be doing stupid stuff. Like, I mean, you've heard it all before, and you probably have said it a time or two. It's those types of things where we just assume that the way we behave and the way we react to things is just our personality traits and not something that has triggered a sense of fear within us or triggered a sense of threat within us, and that's just how we respond because we've adapted to respond in a certain way. It's so many things that we are attached to, particularly bad behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors, because it's all we know, right? We don't know the outcome of other ways, right? And we know maybe how things will go when we react a certain way. So to deviate from that, it will sometimes feel scary and it makes us feel vulnerable. So as parents like Jack, who I believe to be a very good parent, obviously he's engaging, he loves his kids, you know, he's very responsive, he's nurturing, he's loving, he's all of that. But just like most of us, despite doing the very best you can, despite being a very good parent, you will make mistakes. You will sometimes think you're doing the right thing and it may be causing more harm than good. I just want to suggest to you that I'm not saying that you have to be on edge about everything you say, but just be mindful of the things you say and how you respond to your children, particularly when you're tired or when you're stressed or when you're angry. And they may, especially if they're younger, they may be coming to you with a need. Now, that is not to say things won't happen. I'm sure Jack wasn't intentionally trying to be dismissive, and that isn't to say one incident will necessarily throw a child into this downward spiral of bad coping skills or all these things. And we don't even know from this episode what happened after that. This may show up in the next episode, but from this episode we can assume that Jack never revisited that conversation with Randall. Jack didn't come back the next day and say, you know, Randall, I was tired, and you don't have to, you know, let me talk about what being a good kid is. Or maybe you don't have to be the big good kid, you know. He didn't revisit that conversation with Randall. He didn't go back and reaffirm him and say it's okay to be afraid. Reach out to me for help, or to reach out to your mom for help. It's okay to talk about how you feel. He never revisited that in that particular episode. So I suggest, when it comes to kids, if you say something out of frustration, or if you say something just to get, you know, to get to a certain outcome, if you're tired, if you're anyway emotional, that may not have been the best thing to say. Or if you were somewhat dismissive of your child because you think you may have thought something was trivial, or it didn't matter to you at that moment, always, you know, take time to regroup, and then always revisit that with that child to, like I said, reaffirm that child, to remind that child that you will create space for that child to come to you should they need it, because you don't want to, you know, make it a recurring event where you may be dismissive of something, or you may think something is not important, and then that child begins to pick up on, you know, those cues, and then eventually they stop coming for help, you know, eventually they stop talking. And that's how the unresolved issues from your childhood follows you all the way through adulthood. Like I said, don't leave your child hanging, don't leave your kid hanging, because that will set the groundwork for kids to turn into adults like Randall, who internalize all of their fears and all of their worries, leaving them to struggle in silence. Okay, lastly, I want you to recognize how unresolved trauma always show up in other areas of your life. It permeates every aspect of your life regardless. So that bad breakup you had last year where you felt like, oh, I'm over it, I'm gonna move on with my life, and just not acknowledge the pain, yeah, it's gonna show up again. It's gonna show up again in other relationships if you refuse to address it. Or, you know, that divorce you went through, or that surgery that you had to experience, that loss you had, whether it was a job or a loved one, and you just think that you can just get up and move on and not process that grief and that pain related to that. Oh, it's gonna show up again. Just be prepared. And sometimes, just like Randall, he responded to Malik's dad like, oh, I run to clear my mind, I run to do that. And running is fine, working out is fine. It is a healthy thing to do as a supplemental tool. You can't utilize certain things that are, you know, independently they are healthy. You can't utilize them as your sole source of coping. And, you know, sometimes we do that. We take these healthy things that are meant for good, and we turn them into maladaptive coping strategies. And maladaptive is just like unhealthy, right? Unhealthy coping strategies. So in most cases, running is healthy. But when you are running to avoid talking about things, when you're running because you so you won't have to face, you know, the anger, the disappointment, the hurt, all of these things. When you're engaging in these things as your only form of therapeutic release, then it becomes unhealthy. So you can't run away from your problems like Randall. And you will see that towards the end of the episode. He really, it he collides with his issues, and then he has a breakdown. So you can't run away from your problems. You can't outwork your problems. You can't eat away your problems. You cannot shop away your problems or happy hour your problems away. Like, you can't even sleep away your problems, because some of us, we all do the same things. Like, when we stressed out, we go to sleep. There ain't enough sleep in the world that's going to resolve the issues that you will eventually have to face. Sleeping is okay if you think, okay, let me just take a break, let me regroup. Running is okay if you're using it as, let me clear my mind and let me come back to it, right? If you are not utilizing it as a supplemental tool, then you're using it as a way to avoid the real issues. So you guys, that's all I have for you today. I really hope this video was insightful and helpful to you. I really want to keep this conversation going. Please don't hesitate to comment. Tell me what you think, even if you disagree. Like, I want to hear about it, because that's how conversation goes, and that's how we all learn from each other. So what are some ways that you tend to avoid facing unresolved issues from your past? Let me know below. See you. Bye.